Okie dokie everybody, how are you? Good afternoon and welcome, Saitlanders. We hope that you are very, very well in spite of the prevailing circumstances in the Rainbow Nation, in spite of the madness of the new South Africa, in spite of African National Congress rapacious plundering, and in spite of the unfathomable stupidity of the liberals in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg, southern suburbs of Cape Town, and western suburbs of Durban, who continue to believe that if only we hugged one another tighter, if only we held hands more, and if only we just believed, everything would be okay. Farm murders would disappear. Gender-based violence, it would be unheard of. I want to talk to you as briefly as I'm capable of doing, in spite of my typical long-windedness. Among Irish people, my people are Irish, my mom's people are German, but if you endeavor to stick to one prevalent nationality, it's Irish all the way back on my father's side. And we have an expression called kissing the Blarney Stone. People who talk a lot are said to have kissed the Blarney Stone. And the Blarney Stone is a special stone, ancient stone, that you kiss while lying upside down. You know, it's positioned in a certain way. You put your body through a sort of a hole and you kiss the stone. And that's meant to give you the gift of eloquence. So you can imagine, in a community of Irish people, because where I grew up as a kid was first settled by 10, or roughly 10, Irish families that came out to be among the first workers at the Kynoch fertilizer factory in Mbogotweni, on the upper south coast of Natal, just north of Amanzimtoti. So the remnants of those families, the Kellys and the Roaches and everybody, were still there. And you can imagine my aunts and uncles when I was a kid. Oh, he kissed the Blarney Stone, that one. Anyway, as briefly as I can, the story of the dirty bombs in Ukraine, what is going on? It's high drama. This is really there's something quite, it's not play anymore, if it ever was before. Well, I'm going to tell you the story in chronological order, which is not the order in which it came out. But it's far easier to follow a story if you begin with the background, then the introduction, then the beginning of the story proper, and then the middle, and then what they call the denouement, where you bring all the pieces together, and the end and the epilogue. You start with once upon a time, and you end with lived happily ever after. In late February, after the Russians had invaded the Donbass. Donbass, as I've said before, stands for Don River Valley Coal Basin. Don River Valley Coal Basin. The Don River, in fact, lies in Russia. And it's quite some way away from the Donbass oblasts of Ukraine, now of Russia. But that's what means Donbass. And it refers to the two oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk. So this is late February. The invasion happened on the 24th of February. You will remember that it was scheduled for the 22nd. And it came out, there was a leak by a fellow who called himself the Avenging Angel, one of Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Tomato juice. Very healthy. So they weighed their options, the Russians weighed their options for a couple of days before proceeding with the invasion. And the Avenging Angel has since been arrested, although nobody's dead certain which of the 5 key people it is who have been arrested is the Avenging Angel. But it's understood that he's one of those 5, including the head of the FSB and so on. But that's ancient history. They discovered a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb. But nobody knew about it. And then last week, a second dirty bomb was discovered. A dirty bomb is a bomb which contains either nuclear, chemical, or biological material that is terribly toxic, for want of a better word, but they are not as such conventional chemical or biological or nuclear weapons. They may be improvised or makeshift explosive devices driven, whose explosiveness is driven by something as ordinary as TNT, dynamite, or any other conventional explosive. But they have inside of them this rubbish, this radioactive waste, or whatever the case may be. Following the discovery of the one last week, Sergei Shoigu, the head of the Russian armed forces, made a number of telephone calls over the weekend to his peers in the USA and UK and France, and I think Germany too, and I think there were other phone calls to Italy and wherever else, I'm not sure. But by all accounts, he made a long series of many phone calls. Apparently, nobody knows what was said in those phone calls. Nobody knows the content. What I'm about to tell you is pure speculation. But it is a reasonable, it's an educated guess. What would he want to talk about? Golf? Maybe, but not that likely. Forthcoming, sending satellites to space? Not likely. The likely content of the conversation was, guys, you and I both know that through telltale evidence that we've picked up, this was produced by you. That is to say, NATO. You as a collective. I'm dealing with you as an individual, but part of that collective noun. Or he may have said, we don't know that it was produced by NATO. It could have been produced by the Ukrainians. It's, after all, a very simple thing to produce. Very simple in explosive terms, in operational terms. Alarm clock, you know, the old stories, films in the 70s and 80s. If a bomb was set off, there was always an alarm clock involved. So, of course, I'm being slightly silly, but you know what I mean. Remote control device, cell phone, radio thing, James Bond, whatever the case may be, relatively simple. However, notwithstanding that we don't think you did it, we think the Ukrainians did it, you and I both know that every single thing that has happened, that the Ukrainians have done for the past 7 months, has been with your imprimatur. That's to say, your blessing. Like in the old days, a church cardinal would give, or a bishop would give his ring, signet ring. That means that I, Bishop so-and-so, hereby approve of what this monk has written, or what that priest is saying, or whatever the case may be, or new tax law, or whatever. Or, at your behest. You either approve of it, or you are the very ones who instigate it. Everything. We know that. We have the evidence. Last week, how's this for a true story? Last week, Ben Wallace, the Minister of Defence of the UK, travelled to Washington to hold urgent conversations with his counterpart. And this Mampara said before he left, and then it leaked, our communications have been compromised. Meaning, I can't send secure messages to Washington. I have to go there in person to hold a conversation. The telephone lines are tapped, the satellite phones are intercepted, the WhatsApp messages are not secure, the SMSs are decrypted. As it were. Of course, they're not communicating, and never were by SMS, presumably. But the point being that the Russians are in a position to say, don't look at us like we're stupid. We know full well, and you know that we know full well everything that's cooking. It's now a matter, it's an undisputed matter, that the Russians and the Ukrainians reached an agreement to enter a truce or an armistice. I wouldn't like to say what was the precise quality of the agreement, whether it amounted to a truce or an armistice or whatever category in military terms applies. But they reached agreement that was tantamount anyway to a cessation of hostilities. Boris Johnson heard of that. This agreement was reached in Turkey. Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, heard of it, and he flew out to Ukraine immediately, to Kiev. He met with Volodymyr Zelensky, and he said to him, under no circumstances can you stop this war. It must continue. It must be prosecuted to its terminal conclusion. So, don't kid us that such things as dirty bombs could ever have been manufactured and deployed without your involvement. That is the gist of the story, of the tale. Now we come to the moral of the story. What is the moral of the story? It is that it seems as if the United States of America, and I mention the USA separate to NATO, the USA as a part of NATO, but also as the USA, and NATO, the USA being very cavalier in all of its endeavors, very quick to act in a what is the word? To behave as if it's a law unto itself. Therefore, it must be counted. Sorry, somebody just walked into my driveway and then promptly walked right out. So therefore, it must be accounted as jointly and severally. Have you ever seen that phrase in a legal document? Where it says that the parties shall jointly and severally be held liable. I'm doing a contract with you, 7 guys. If you mess up, this contract entitles me to recourse by law or recourse under law against you as individuals and as the group. The USA, jointly and severally, and NATO, are hell-bent on escalating the war in Ukraine to the extent that they are in some or other way, shape, and or form party to what may be the first deployments ever in history, in the history of warfare. Real, actual, dirty bombs. That is to say, to the deployment for the purposes of activation, presumably. Weapons containing, presumably, it is presumptive, but it is a reasonably safe presumption, the use of nuclear or fissile waste or radioactive filth, whatever is the correct term, in war. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very great thing indeed. It doesn't mean that the sky is going to fall on your heads tomorrow. To quote the Gauls, Asterix and Obelix. It was their belief system. Their god was Tutatis. And they believed that the end, the worst thing that could possibly happen, was that the sky wouldn't be held up anymore. Land on their heads. We're not suggesting that the sky's going to land on our heads tomorrow. Who knows how these things will pan out? Who knows? The war may take a course for the better, to armistice, to truce, to cessation of hostilities, to treaty, to amity and brotherly love. The day after tomorrow, it could happen. But, for now, we are seeing unprecedented ruthlessness on the part of the United States of America and NATO in this war. The possibility of it having been done by the Russians or another party is not non-existent, but it is so ludicrous or ridiculous, that is to say, worthy of ridicule, worthy of mockery, that it's perfectly reasonable not to account it, unless in a turn up for the books it turns out to be the case the Russians were going to dirty bomb themselves to escalate the war, as if they needed a pretext. If they wanted to bring in another 100,000 soldiers tomorrow, as by the way they are now bringing in T-90 tanks, they're finally bringing in their second best tanks. And I saw yesterday, very, very, very interestingly, that apparently, this is a source inside Russia, excuse me, but my voice is rough, so I must have those sips. I'm sorry that it has to happen on camera. The T-14, the Armatas, who knew? The last that I knew was definitively the Armata had not gone into mass production. All of a sudden, the experts reckon that there are Armatas on their way to Ukraine. So at long last, the Russians are bringing out the big guns. And of course, what did we see last week? How many KH-101s? 555s? 555s, the KH-101 missiles. 13 planes and vessels fired 60 missiles or something. I could be messing that up a bit. Anyway, guys, enough is enough. You have got an update on the dirty bomb story. It's very, very big in historical terms, in terms of the story of mankind as occupier and steward of the earth. In those terms, like, you remember the space landings? One of the astronauts famously said, what? A small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. So this is a small step in the war. Nobody got blown up. It's just 2 bombs, they were found, but a giant leap in mankind's history of warfare, the deployment of actual radioactive bombs. Okie dokes, everybody. Thank you for watching. God bless you, keep you, and we'll speak again soon. Cheerio. Bye-bye.